Good morning, everybody. I'm going to start the session for Daniel, and then he's going to take over. But it's really good to be here and to be able to share godly governance. I think a lot of us um, are at a place where we are looking for real change in South Africa. Well, the truth is, God's been looking for that for a very long time, and I believe in the spiritual realm that's been a battle. And God laid on my heart about 3 weeks ago, that 3 or 4 weeks, that the spiritual battle in South Africa has been won. We now got to take it. We've got to walk in. I might have mentioned that last week. We need to walk into governance. Daniel and myself and a team have just come back from Harding in KZN, where if you go into the local areas, there's sewage running in the streets. A little boy drowned in a big sewage tank well thing a while ago, where brothers are killing sisters for becoming Christians, by the way. And this is what's going on, and we are not being made aware of that. We've been made aware of a lot of other things outside of our own country, etc. But this is what's happening all over South Africa at the moment. There are evils going on that's just been hidden, not been spoken about, but people are suffering. And God is calling us as his children. Jesus says the governance is on his shoulders, and therefore on the shoulders of each and every one of us, to whatever measure God calls you. So last week we spoke about godly governance and some of the principles of godly governance. We spoke about natural law, which actually came out of biblical law, and the biblical law, how God says we should actually run a governance and serve our people. In fact, a government, anybody working in government should be serving. And so this week we're going to go further, and Daniel is very good in the strategy side and understands governance. So we're going to go further. We're going to have a look at what does the government look at, especially from local level. What should it look at? What should it look like? What does it look like? I'm just going to take you through the first few slides. I'm going to hand over to Daniel. He does all the technical and strategic stuff. And I trust that you will enjoy this and have questions for us afterwards. So, the government of the future, if we look at our topics we'd like to cover today, the first one is the broken government or a broken government. Then, what is a righteous government? Then we're going to go over to Daniel, and he's going to share for us the government. In fact, he's going to go from righteous government to righteous principles and help us understand how not easily, but that we have the steps, we have the blueprint from the Holy Spirit to turn South Africa around, to make communities that can thrive. So the ideal government has a balanced division of powers. In our constitution, it is written that our government has three dimensions: the judiciary, the legislature, and the executive. So the judiciary is really all our courts, from our magistrates, High Court, Supreme Court, Constitutional Court. The legislature is the parliament. That's where the people sit and make the laws of the land. And the executive is our cabinet. It's where our president, vice president, ministers, etc. sit. Each of these should actually be autonomous. They should be working separate from one another, yet together. But that is not really what we see happening at this stage. The judiciary should have a restraint over the lawmaking. Every time a law is made, the judiciary should be looking at that law and saying, does that law align with our constitution or not? They're actually not doing that at this stage. The only time they stand up is when somebody from the outside or another political party complains about a law, then they start looking at it. So they are certainly not at this stage doing their task effectively and efficiently. The legislator needs to hold the parliament executives accountable to take the laws that they make and make sure that those laws are used in South Africa correctly, in the right way, and in line with the constitution and the laws made. Again, that is not actually happening in the reality. So that's how it should look. They should be working together, but accountable to one another, but also autonomous. So what happens here? So the political party comes in. Now, when we go into government, we're supposed to forget about the political party we're in. We're here then to serve the people. Doesn't matter if I'm Hope or ANC or DA, but the political party comes in. And so effectively, the president of that political party is the one that tends to end up calling the shots and having influence into the legislator and having his foot in both fields of executive and legislator, where that is what's happening at the moment with the party. He also is the person that actually chooses the Constitutional Court judges, even though we have bodies that are supposed to have a say in who is the judges and who are the judges in the Constitutional Court. So the president effectively, or the party, or the ruling party, in this case, the ruling GNU, has say in both the others. So you can see that it's quite upside down and backwards. And the result of that is that we end up with a state capture. And that's where South Africa is at the moment. So we see in Proverbs 29:2, it says, when the godly are in authority, the people rejoice, but when the wicked are in power, they groan. And this is exactly where we are at. We have a broken government with state capture at the moment. How do we bring it back? How do we restore? We restore better than simply by bringing God back, opening the door and saying, God, we've messed up. We need you back. We need to do the biblical values that we know were in the natural law. We need to bring that in. And when we do that, then we'll find that the Bible, the Constitution, then gets filtered once again through the Bible. So anything that's not the principles of God need to go out and the rest stays. And by the way, we have a good Constitution, except for the last few decades, the laws that have been put in. And our Constitution, actually, if it was used correctly, South Africa would be running effectively and efficiently. Isaiah 33 and verse 22, the Lord is our judge, he's our lawgiver, and he's our king. So the Lord is actually the one that gives us authority both in the judiciary, the legislature, and the executive. If we use the word of God and the principles of God as our foundation for each of those dimensions, then we will be running South Africa as we should. If we go over to how our government's principles work and what we have today, we see a pyramid like this. And it's at this juncture that I'm going to give over to Daniel, and he's going to take you further through our structures, how they do work and should work. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Diane. Good morning, everyone. So this is basically where we are today, what we have today. We, the people on the ground, what we call grassroots level, we live in geographical wards, but those wards are also political wards. So that's how the country is divided, and we've got in total 4,468 wards. Now, the question I have for you is to think, do you know who's your ward committee? Because there's supposed to be a structure called a ward committee consisting of 10 people democratically elected in your ward, led by the ward councillor that should look after the needs and the interests of the ward. I don't know, in our ward, it's non-existent. I've never heard of those people. I don't know who they are, if they've been appointed. And we look at maybe that's where the problem is, because government is not vested enough in that this grassroots level structures that constitutionally, the Constitution says we should have ward committees. The first touch point we as the people actually have is the local council. And we know there's 205 of those councils, plus 8 metro councils currently in South Africa. So already you can see the touch point of the people is being removed from government. We actually have one hurdle to cross before we can talk to our local council, which should be through the ward councillor. There's a few ward councillors, few and far between, that actually does try to do that, but they don't necessarily have a supporting ward committee, so it's already a challenge for us. Then above the council, the local councils, there's district councils. I think very few of us even knows about these councils. They sort of in the background, and the main task is to look after the district roads, in other words, the roads between council between towns, the water supply to and between the towns, so all the infrastructure that's connecting towns, they should be looking at. And there's 44 of those districts. We know that there's a district municipality somewhere. How the people that ends up in those district councils gets elected, I'll tell you now. But until I did some research, I wasn't even aware that these people existed, how they get elected, how do they get appointed, all of that. And we know that there's a challenge with them doing their work as well, if we just look at the state of our roads. Only then do we have the provincial level. Now, we all know the 9 provinces, and that we think works very well. Or it's actually functioning, but whether it works well for us, I think we all can attest to that that's not the case. Then we have national level, the parliament, which mostly for most of us seems to be a circus. So as you can see, the further up the pyramid we go, the more divorced we, the people, are from this government structure that's actually imposed upon us. With the structure itself, there's nothing wrong. It's the way it's managed. So let's first look at our electoral system, how it works. So we know that in next year, maybe beginning of 2027, depends on when they will declare the date, we go into municipal elections. What happens is you will have 2 and sometimes 3 ballot papers, depending on the geographical area where you are. The first ballot paper is the only place where you can directly elect a person. So if you look at it at the top, what was written, we've mostly got a representative democracy, as opposed to what could be called a direct democracy. So the reason why we have it's actually more of a mixed system, but mixed in the sense this is our only direct vote we've got. So, and what happens is only 50% of the councillors is voted by us as the people. The other 50%, what happens is the other ballot paper, we vote for a party. The party decides who's the other 50% of the councillors that's going to rule over us. We've got no say in who those people are. So you can see I deliberately put it kind of in the shadows, this is coming out of the shadows because we not necessarily, we know there's a political party, but how they operate and how they influence our lives daily, we're not necessarily aware of. So already you can see, basically our vote gets diluted by 50% just with those 2 ballot papers. We also are supposed to, after we've elected the councillor and we've elected the party that we want to rule over us, we should then go into another day of elections where we should elect the ward committees in our wards. Now, that's why the IEC tents will stay 2 or 3 days after the election so that that same infrastructure can be used to elect the ward committees. It doesn't happen, it rarely happens. So again, we are being let down because the ward committee is really the guys that's the closest to us that should look after our interests. Now, this already, I think, paints a bit of a bleak picture. But what happens now at district level? Who are those guys? What happens is 40% of the seats at district level gets filled by people from the local government that we've already elected. So in a sense, they are representing us there. But the other 60% of the seats again gets filled by the party based on the proportional vote. So if a party got 40% of the votes, of those 60% in that district, they can fill 40% of the seats. Again, who's those people on the lists? We've got no idea. Yes, they publish the lists. How did they get onto that list? We actually have no idea. Sometimes there's some kind of an election happening in the background within the party, but it's really up to the discretion of the party as to who ends up on those party lists. And that's where a lot of the corruption we see today is, we know, for instance, from the ANC perspective, that's where cadre deployment starts happening. They will put their cadres on the list, and inevitably, when they get, based on the proportional vote they get, they will deploy them into district level already. So already at local level, we are being jeopardized. At district level, we are even being jeopardized more. Our vote gets diluted, actually gets stolen from us by this party structures. At provincial and national level, it's totally representative. So we only vote for a party. You never vote for an individual. You don't vote for the president. The party decides. That party structure. Now, I hope you can see how powerful that party structure actually is. Sometimes that's where people think the deep state comes from. There's various terminologies for that. But it really is an unseen power that influences our lives directly on a daily basis. So the challenge is, in South Africa, that's what our constitution currently prescribes, is this multi-party representative democracy, which for me is really it's not a true democracy. We think we are being blinded to think that we actually have a vote. We actually have a say. We don't really, not a direct say. There's people that make decisions on our behalf that's not necessarily in our best interests. There's no guarantee that the decisions they make is in our best interest. No, nothing to hold them accountable either. And in the past, we know with a dominant party, it was really destructive. Now we've got more of a multi-party, but it doesn't really change the game, as we have seen. There's no real difference. So what's a viable alternative? What we could have, for instance, is a non-partisan democracy. In other words, the whole purpose of this is to take as much power away from the parties as possible and even be able to operate without political parties. So, let's look a bit about how that could work. Firstly, we will vote the same as we vote today at ward level for for ward committees. So we will make sure that that actually happens. Those ward committees, which means 10 people in each ward, becomes a candidate pool for councillors at municipal level or local level. The people will then vote and say, if these are the candidates for our local municipality, which one of those people we would like to see as a councillor in our ward. So only ward councillors. So instead of only 50% of the people appointed, chosen by the people, the councillors chosen by the people, we will choose 100% of who represents us at local level. That will also become the candidate pool for district level. So we will have another ballot paper where we choose, and of course you can see these elections will have to be staggered. So it's a bit more effort. But we've also got a solution for that, which I will talk you through later. But in essence, this is now the third election we will have to participate in, to choose our district leaders and then our provincial leaders, which becomes a pool again for national. But the net effect of this is nobody can get to national level unless they've gone through the ranks, which means only the best of the best proceed to the next level. And we will actually have true leaders, that's community leaders that knows how to operate in communities, knows how to look after community needs, that will actually end up at national level. If you see the metro councils, the reason why they are different to local councils is because they're so large. They order tens of magnitude orders larger than the normal towns. So they do have to be handled a bit differently. So those are the 8 metros. But what we propose is to move metro councils up to district level and subdivide the metro councils into regions. Today, every metro is actually operates in regions, but only from an operational perspective. So they've got service depots for water, electricity in the regions. We propose to make those political regions as well. In actual fact, it's almost reverting back to in the past, we had in city of Joburg, we had 5 different um, councils, which was amalgamated into one metro. But that again brings the leadership closer to the people, because otherwise they're too far removed. If we look at, for instance, tax collection, so I just took a few of these views or dimensions of governance to show what we have today and what we could potentially have tomorrow. So today we have got a centralized tax collection and distribution model, which means we the people pay taxes, including businesses, into the national kitty. That kitty gets divided as follows, and you may not have known this. National government takes 50% of all taxes collected. Provincial government then takes 40%, which leaves 10% at local level, all three of these local levels. And that's why, of course, we know that at local level, you also pay rates and taxes on your property, and you pay for your water, and you pay for your electricity. So those are additional revenue streams over and above the 10%. But it really puts the local councils at a disadvantage. And even at ward level, we've got no sense of a budget at ward level or financial management at ward level. It's just non-existent. It all happens local level, again, being divorced from the people. So even from a monetary perspective, the country can be managed much better. If we look at maybe looking at decentralizing tax collection and distribution, it could look at as follows, where people pay 100% of their taxes at ward levels, which means the money is ring fenced for each ward. The taxes paid by people within and businesses within that ward gets ring fenced to that ward. Now we know it's very unequal. There will be wards that's got barely any money and wards that's got lots of money. We will look at how do we handle that issue. But in essence, we will know what's the income potential of every ward, which will also tell us where's the biggest needs to grow the local economy, for instance. What we then say is 80% of that money stays allocated to that ward. 20%, and this percentages may change. The point is the bulk of the money stays allocated to that ward for spending on their infrastructure and their needs, their community halls. Only 20% goes to the next level, which is the municipal level, at the local municipality, and so the same principle. So all the wards, only 20% of their money goes to local level. All the local councils, they keep 80% of the money they've got, and so forth. So we go up the pyramid until we get to national level, and national level only gets 20% from all the provinces. Now, the implication of this is the governance levels will have to work within their budget. They can't spend more than what they earn. Keeping them lean and mean and efficient. That's really the principle here. They don't have unlimited budgets. They're not fed from national government, and they can do with the money and they can squander the money. The other thing is talking about this, we know there's inequality. How would that, for instance, work? So what we then say is at every level, 20% of the budget can be redistributed to the lower levels again to bring that equalization, to support less affluent constituencies. So that's how we slowly over time uplift those less affluent constituencies by subsidizing them from the more affluent constituencies. So it's a very more equitable model fair, and just, and will self-correct or it will self-manage it over time. The thing is, to be able to do all of this, you need proper systems in place. And that is where we've got a real challenge. So let's look at government's operating model today. And we'll see where things go wrong and again how we can correct it. So there's a few things that's really impeding democracy. The one is the concept, and it's a policy of our government today, to centralize decision making, which means the higher they can make the decisions, the better for them, because we know in the end it profits them financially and they're actually robbing the people at the bottom. That's really the thing about centralized decision making. The other thing is they keep us in the dark and they create chaos deliberately by having disconnected and fragmented systems. Talking about systems, it's not only IT systems. There's a lot of IT systems because that's the data. But at national level, they've got their own platforms, which doesn't talk to the platforms at provincial level, which doesn't talk to the platforms at district level. At local level, it's even worse. Every municipality can decide their own systems, have their own service providers. It's a lot of wastage. It's a lot of duplication, duplicate effort, all of that's happening. At ward level, we've got zero systems currently. Um, and then, so that proliferation of systems is, it's all sorts, you know. And they do say by having standard or common regulations, all they say is there's the financial management regulations. So any system a local authority implements needs to comply to those regulations, which again is a lot of effort, a lot of work, because we get systems from overseas that has to be tweaked for our regulations. And it doesn't only happen once, it happens 10, 20 times in every local municipality, over and over and over. But in those tweaks and that disconnectedness and the the gaps that gets opened, that's where the money falls through eventually, and no service delivery happens. You report it, things, and you report and you report, but it doesn't go anywhere. It goes into a black hole. That's the cause of all three of these um, operational issues that causes those, yeah, that's the cause of those issues. So how could we correct that? Firstly, we could have policy-driven but devolved decision making. In other words, policies get set at national level. Again, what type of policies? And that goes back to what Diane showed us in the beginning. Not ideology, policies based on ideology, but on sound principles, governance principles. Those policies gets devolved, the decision making around those policies gets devolved to the lowest level possible, the lowest level of impact. So if there's decisions to be made for a ward, the ward committee needs to make those decisions, not somebody higher up in the chain on behalf of the ward. Now, that sounds like a potential, you don't want people making decisions left, right, and center with no accountability. And that's where we have systems that's actually filtered down from the top. So your systems ensure that everybody works on the same platforms, does things the same way, and in the system, there's a full audit trail of what decisions are made by whom. There's checks and balances built in. So you rely on your systems to do the checks and balances. But you still have people at the lowest level making those decisions. But we have a full record of any decisions made. Again, those systems are procured ones, deployed many times, but maintained from a central point. So that's where centralization makes sense, only from a system perspective, not from a policy or decision-making perspective. Then we have common regulations, as we have today, but they are embedded in standardized and automated processes, as opposed to non-standardized and non-automated processes or manual processes, which is where the margin of error comes in. So here you close all those gaps through those standardized automated processes, which runs on the connected and centrally maintained systems. But the key here is decision making is devolved to the lowest level. And that will enable and protect democracy instead of impede democracy. If we look at now the systems specifically, because a lot of this relies on those systems being implemented, what could we do? So technology is key and technology is available today. As you can see here, we keep the same structures, but those structures gets digital twins, a twin view in the digital world. And the technology for that is available today and it's been proven. It's blockchain platforms or blockchain networks. In essence, what it means is national level, we will have one node. In essence, it's a server somewhere in a server room, but it's connected to the rest of the network. But that server has got embedded in it, encoded in it, the policies for national level. Each province has got a node on the network. So there's a node on the network that represents the province. And again, the same with the policies, all of that is encoded in there. And that's where it comes to that, those systems, that the automated processes, all of that is embedded in the nodes that runs in this network. Same at district level. Every district has got a node. Every municipality has got a node. And every ward has got a node on the network. And it's all connected. The reason being, in a blockchain network, just a bit of the principles, is the more nodes you have in the network, the stronger the network becomes, the more incorruptible it becomes. That's the characteristic of a blockchain network. Because in the background, what happens? Whatever you do on one node immediately gets replicated to all the other nodes. And that gives it the ability to be immutable. So any information captured in the network, to be able to change that information, you have to change all 5,000 nodes on the network. And that's impossible. That's physically impossible. Because the moment somebody tampers on the information on one node, in the background, the blockchain network validates all the time. And it says, here's information that's different. Which one is correct? It will say the nodes that's got the most of the same information, that's correct, then overwrite the ones that's been tampered with. So even if somebody tries to tamper with the information, it's self-correcting all the time. The other thing is it enhances decentralization because each node becomes has got a vote for consensus on this network, which means again, and this is why it's an ideal tool for voting. We will look a bit now about how can it be used for voting. It also provides transparency because everybody's got access to the information. Now, of course, some information will stay private, and that's the code, the rules you encode in this. So nobody can see people's personal details except if they're allowed to. But all of those privacy rules are encoded in this network and cannot be circumvented because of the nature of the blockchain. But it provides that full transparency so that whenever money is spent by an entity, immediately it's visible what did they spend it on, how much did they spend to everybody else on the network. So it becomes everybody can monitor anybody else. It becomes self-monitoring as well. How would the people access it? Through apps. So on the blockchain, there's apps connected to it, and you can do various things as a citizen. Firstly, it's voting. So imagine we now can do all that voting, those levels of voting, online from the comfort of our home. When my vote is cast, it's recorded in the blockchain. Nobody can change it. The privacy is there, so nobody can see who's the individual that placed that vote, but everybody can see a vote has been placed, and the tallying gets done in the background immediately. So as we vote for those different levels, of course, when somebody from ward level is voted into as a councillor, his position becomes vacant. Now we have to vote again in our ward. Who's going to fill that? Or when we have voted before, there's a ranking of people that came second, and they immediately automatically move into that position. So using the blockchain, all those levels, as people move up, other people move in, and the blockchain says this is the next person that got the right amount of votes. He then gets appointed. So the choosing happens on the blockchain platform. The appointment happens by validating that that's the right person. What that then allows us to do is to recall people. If they don't perform, their constituency can say, this guy, and put in a vote of no confidence in real time on the blockchain network. That ward or that municipality, whoever falls within that constitution, will get a notification saying, this is the case, there's a vote of no confidence. Do you agree? What's your vote? And so we can recall people and then put new people in their place. It's a continuous democracy. Therefore, we get rid of this every 5 years, national and provincial election, and halfway in between the other 5 years for municipal elections. Because that's also an impeding mechanism. It impedes progress because plans get restarted every 5 years. And if a plan doesn't complete within 5 years, all that money gets wasted, the project dies, and we start a new project in 5 years. So we don't progress. With this, we will have people and continuity that can progress projects over multiple years. We don't say a person can only be in governance for 5 years. We say as long as he does his job well, he can stay there. He can be there for 20 years. But the moment he doesn't do his job well, we've got the ability to recall him. The other thing is like that model about tax collection and funds distribution. Again, the blockchain network can automatically do all of that for us. Everybody can in real time see how much money is being earned in this constituency, how much of the money is spent where. You can actually track on a blockchain. There's that visibility to see where did the money go. Service delivery reporting and monitoring, the same blockchain network. When I put a service request in for a water leak, there's tracking visibility all in real time on the platform. How long did it take to repair? How many times has in this place has it? So all of those data is available on the blockchain and available through an app to anybody to look at. Then I don't have much time, but there's also the concept of seed vouchers. So how do we help people where today they get grants, they become reliant on grants. Grants becomes physical money that gets given to somebody. We've got the concept of seed vouchers. SEED is an acronym for socio-economic empowerment and development, which means for people that qualify for certain grants, if you want to call it that, for instance, for education, they can't afford to send their children to school. So let's look at education. They will get a seed grant to us. They will get a seed grant to a certain value that will be recorded on the blockchain, not the individual, but in which constituency was that seed grant, where was that voucher redeemed, at which educational facility, and it can be private facilities as well. Those facilities will get, in the background, will get a tax exemption or a tax grant, a tax relief. So no money exchanges hands, but they can then use that tax exemption to pay for this child to go to their school. So you give choice to the people without they can on an equal basis get the same access as more affluent people. The same with starting small businesses. The same with any type of grant that we have today could be in the form of a voucher. Then, as government spends money already, we can have visibility of how they spend their money. So there's again the check and balances, and the blockchain allows all of that. In closing, I just want um, to say wisdom from above, James 3. I'm going to quote a scripture here, but this is something that God has told me. This is why we are in the situation where we are and what the solution is. Who among you is wise and intelligent? Let him by his good conduct show his good deeds with gentleness and humility of true wisdom. So again, everything we do in governance specifically, we need to do with gentleness and humility, but with true wisdom from God. The opposite, the counter to that is if you have bitter jealousy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not be arrogant, and as a result, be in defiance of the truth. How much do we see defiance of the truth today? But also selfish ambition. In some translations, it's strife. But if you go and look in Strong's Concordance, it says electioneering and pushing yourself into office, which is really what politics is about. The politics we see today is that. So this really says to me, this is superficial wisdom that doesn't come from above, but is earthly, secular, natural, unspiritual, even demonic. And I believe that's what we are seeing today, and why a model like we are proposing brings the opposite spirit. For where jealousy and selfish ambition exist, there is disorder. Do we see that today? Unrest, rebellion, and every evil thing and morally degrading practice. It's happening before our eyes. That's really what it is. So to counter that with the opposite spirit, wisdom from above is pure, peace-loving, gentle, reasonable, full of compassion and good fruits, unwavering, out that self-righteous hypocrisy and self-serving guile. So that, in essence, for us is really what godly governance, biblically inspired governance could look like, and that what we are proposing and that what we are investing in, we're investing our lives today to bring about such a turnaround for our country. I thank you.